Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. The time is now 6 p.m. and I declare the briefing session open. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk people. We would like to pay respect to the elders of the Noongar Nation, past and present, who have walked and cared for the land, and we acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions made to the life of this city and this region. Mrs. Smart, could you please make the announcement?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In regards to tonight's meeting, please note that the audio proceedings of the meeting will be live broadcast online, with the exception of any matters discussed behind closed doors. That broadcast will remain available following the conclusion of the meeting. In regards to the COVID-19 pandemic situation, the City of Wanneroo is committed to ensuring the safety of all attendees at public meetings. In accordance with the West Australian State Government health directives, social distancing has been applied to the council chambers, and masks are required to be worn at all public indoor settings such as this. Therefore, all attendees at this meeting are please asked to wear their mask at all times whilst in the building, even whilst talking. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Smart. And also for the live stream, we might sound a little muffled, but that is because we are wearing our masks. Moving on to item 1, attendances as per the record. Item 2, apologies and leave of absence. We have an apology from Councillor Huntley and an apology from Councillor Coetzee. Moving through to deputations, so we have 2 deputations this evening, and the rules of the deputation are: deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, depending on the number of deputations received, to address the council members, unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement, and no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from council members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until their administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for members of the public at item 7 in the order of business. So our deputations, our first deputation is in relation to item amendment number 188 to DPS2 to introduce an additional use of motor vehicle repairs at lot 23, 250 Carabooda Road in Carabooda. It's item 4.2, and our speaker is Bianca Sandri. And if I could welcome you to the council chambers and ask if you could clearly state your name and address for our records. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor and councillors. I am Bianca Sandri from Urbanista Town Planning, located at 231 Buller Street in Perth. I am speaking against the officer's recommendation contained in item 4.2 in relation to scheme amendment number 188 on behalf of the landowners Nina and Peter Henderson and their 2 children, Dan and Ben, who are here this evening. We also do have local community members in the chamber as well. By way of background, and potentially for those who were not here to consider the previous application, the business has been operating on the site for many years as both on the site and mobile mechanics for the general area. This application was actually prompted by a complaint received by the city in 2019. It is unclear what that complaint said or who it was from and whether it related to the local area. The site has also never been occupied with a rural land use nor an extractive industry, as it cannot obtain a water licence, and as far as we're aware, it does not have any resource for extraction either. Accordingly, the only purpose of this site, with the lack of a water licence, is really just a residential dwelling and is not offering anything more than that. The incorporation of the motor vehicle repairs allows for 3.2% of the total site area to be utilised to support surrounding businesses in this location. This council previously resolved to initiate the scheme amendment for public advertising, and through that advertising period, there were 7 letters of support, and that is in addition to the petition we had already tabled, which had 166 signatures of support for this local business. Essentially, that shows to us, and no doubt hopefully the councillors, that the business does support local businesses and owners, and ultimately service the agricultural pursuits in that area, and I'll speak to that shortly. The officers within their report suggest that the proposed land use does not fit within the objectives of the zone. We have a contrary view to that, as the zone objective seeks that incompatible uses or subdivision does not occur which would undermine the agricultural, horticulture or animal husbandry in the area, and support uses which enable these uses to continue or expand. We submit, and have previously to this council and through our documentation, that our site is effectively sterilised without a water licence, and the only contribution which this site can offer, and which it currently offers those agricultural land uses, is providing local diesel mechanics to support their machinery and vehicles alike. And again, we have proven that time and time again that the local businesses support this proposal and the convenience of it as well. I'd also like to address one other point that has been raised in the officer's report that suggests that adopting the scheme amendment will likely encourage other non-residential land uses to be applied and sought for within the area. It is my view that that is unlikely, but notwithstanding, if a scheme amendment were to be sought for another property for a different use unrelated to what this council feels is appropriate within the area, that application has to be considered on its merits and within the context of that site. There is no such thing as precedence in relation to a scheme amendment, because at the end of the day, the town planning scheme is this council's scheme, and it's up to this council to determine what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. In summary, this proposal supports the agricultural uses in the area. It does not have an impact on the amenity of the area. It does not have an impact with respect to noise in the area. It actually is supported by the current road network and capacity, and we've provided that as well. The business is relied upon by local businesses and owners, and it supports that rural agricultural use which this council seeks through the Carrabuta area. The business only occupies around 3% of the site, and the balance lot, being 97% or thereabouts, could be used in the future for rural pursuits in the event a water licence opened up, but let's say that's unlikely at this stage. The business is consistent in our view with the rural resource zone objectives. It's also consistent with SPP 2.5 in relation to rural land use. And the scheme amendment is simply for the land use, and all other matters around the operation that will be dealt with at a development application stage, if I can be so presumptuous to say that the scheme amendment would get through here or even the commission. There are also conditions that are applied as part of the scheme amendment, which we do not object to. They were conditions that were sought by this council at the previous meeting, and they still stay, and we have no issue with those. So we seek that this council adopt the scheme amendment. I'm clear you don't make a decision tonight, but in 2 weeks, and happy for any question if that's permitted. Madam Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Ms Sandry, and also a very compelling deputation. Thank you. The council will consider this report next Tuesday, and really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Our next deputation is in relation to item 4.6, tender number 22007, and our speaker is Mr Rod Hicks. If I could kindly invite you down to the podium, if you could state your name and address for our records. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Rod Hicks from company Streetside Advertising, and I live at 61 Lakeview Street, Mariginiup. I'm here to support the recommendation as listed, RFT 2207, for the supply and installation, maintenance and advertising on seats. just make the point that our company specialises in the precise management of this type of arrangement and are the largest provider of this service in Western Australia. Oddly enough, we just happen to be based in the city of Wanneroo. This is our sole and specialised area of expertise, and we do it very well. Our management team has a combined total of over 150 years' experience in this precise area. We don't get involved with anything else except this particular type of management system. We have similar contracts with a total of 6 other cities and currently have over 5,000 seats spread throughout the state. For the past 38 years, we have worked with your city to provide seats at bus stops, some that are permitted to carry advertising. Over that period, we have built up the seat numbers to 600 seats, all at bus stops, and all of which carry only 60 carry advertising. The reason for the low number of advertisers is due to the COVID epidemic and our inability to guarantee local business continuity or tenure until this tender is adopted. We have a large list of local businesses awaiting the opportunity to advertise in this effective and affordable manner. Respectfully, for those that may be unaware, the city currently has just under 900 bus stops, of which 800 can be considered boarding stops. Weekly, 60,000 patrons board a bus within the city, and Streetside provides a seat for approximately 50,000 patrons a week. That's 2.5 million ratepayers per year have a seat at their bus stop that is provided by ourselves. Our submission allows for the immediate provision of a sufficient seats to cater for 57,000 patrons per week, or around 95% of all patrons, and with absolutely no loss or amenity to any patron. We are proud members of the Wanneroo Business Association and having won awards for innovation and manufacturing presented by that organisation, and consider ourselves fully fledged locals. Our directors have lived in the city for over 40 years. We operate from 3 properties within the city, and 80% of our employees live within the city. Our seats are fully manufactured in the city, including the fabricating, galvanising and powder coating, and are assembled by Wanneroo-based businesses. All seat materials, including steel, the aluminium, timber, paint, concrete and fuel supplies, are also purchased from Wanneroo. In fact, 90% of all their purchases are locally supplied. Our extensive product selection of sustainable designs gives the city a wide choice of product, and each seat is designed for a particular application. We have specially designed some 8 seats to accommodate this tender submission. Our seats design includes up-to-date technological advancements common to this type of product, and comes with our proven willingness and ability to include additional new innovations as they become available. We have also offered the city an extremely generous free advertising allocation for the promotion of the city's events and services. Awarding the contract to a locally based team at Streetside makes sense. We have been doing the job very well for over 38 years without complaint. We know the area and where the problems arrive, and have a minimum of 3 vehicles traversing this district daily. We also have a fully dedicated team and vehicle exclusively within the city of Wanneroo at all times. We operate, employ and purchase locally. We have the widest range of seat design, the most experienced management team possible, and the proven expertise to manage the venture. We also have sufficient plant, materials and finance to ensure delivery, and the same local staff to guarantee a continually high responsive installation and maintenance program. Most importantly, we already have 600 seats out there in place and undertake not to remove any seat until a replacement seat is able to be installed in its place, meaning absolutely no disruption for the 50,000 bus patrons that have had the use of the seats each week. We have enjoyed a very successful working relationship with the city officers, particularly over the last few years, where increased roadworks and bus stop requirements and bus route changes have created untold changes to where seats require relocation. At all times, the officers have been mindful of our position and helpful. In response, we have all ensured that all and any requests of any type are handled with the utmost importance. We compliment the officers in their professionalism and look forward to an ongoing mutually beneficial arrangement in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr Hicks, and also thank you for investing in the city of Wanneroo with the business and 80% of employees local residents. So thank you for all being local.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Now we do have another deputation. I'm not sure if Anne-Marie Beavis is here. The reason I'm saying is that the deputation has previously been distributed to all council members and has been made available for attendees at tonight's meeting. So I'll just ask again if Anne-Marie Beavis is here. No? Thank you. And that concludes deputations. So thank you, Ms Sandry, and thank you, Mr Hicks. Our next item is item 4, reports. We're moving to planning and sustainability, and we're joined by Mr Dixon and Mr Bowring. Mr Dixon, over to you. And councillors, if there are any declarations of interest, could you please advise at that point? Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. There are 3 reports from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate on tonight's agenda. I would like to briefly introduce item 4.1 and Mr Bowring item 4.2. With regard to item 4.1, this relates to the Kundula Shopping Centre. The centre has been in a dilapidated state for many, many years, and the city has been proactively trying to revitalise the centre for over 20 years. The strata owners of Lot 252 have been and continue to resist the city's attempts to revitalise the centre. In July last year, the Minister for Planning approved Amendment 173 to our District Planning Scheme number 2, which rezoned the city's Lot 250 from civic and cultural to commercial and recoded the centre from a density code of R20 to R60. The city has also approved a local development plan for the centre to guide future development opportunities. To facilitate the revitalisation and development of the centre, administration is recommending that council requests the Chief Executive Officer writes to the Chairman of the West Australian Planning Commission requesting the Minister for Planning authorise the preparation of an improvement plan and potentially an improvement scheme for the centre. An improvement plan is a high-level strategic instrument used by the state government to advance planning and development of land in an area that requires intervention. Under an improvement plan, the West Australian Planning Commission would become the decision maker for any future development of the centre and can enter into an agreement with the landowners to develop, construct, purchase, sell or pool together land owned by several landowners to facilitate the coordinated development of the centre. It may require the compulsory acquisition of the land by the state government. However, this would only be as a last resort. If the state government agrees to an improvement plan being prepared, then the WAPC, West Australian Planning Commission, would work closely with the city to ensure the development reflects the city's vision and outcomes for the centre. To that extent, they would have regard to the city's approved local development plan, which is included as attachment 3 to your report. An improvement plan can be supported by an improvement scheme where there is a need to put in place planning controls to replace our existing scheme provisions, which only relate to this area. The WAPC would decide if it's needed. In this case, I think it's unlikely. However, the report and recommendations covers the possibility that it would happen. Madam Mayor, administration feels that we have explored every opportunity to work collaboratively with the 8 strata owners of Lot 252 without success, and an improvement plan is the right mechanism to bring about revitalisation and redevelopment of the centre that the local community is seeking. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillors, any questions? Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a couple of questions, if that's okay, for Mr Dixon. The first is, in terms of the appetite for redevelopment, do you know if any of the individual owners are changing their opinion on that, or if the resistance is quite unanimous among all of them?
Through you, Madam Mayor, My understanding is that the landowners' position, the Kandula Plaza landowners of Lot 252, has remained consistently opposed to redevelopment of the centre. More recently, I think in 2016, 2018 and 2020, the city sought their support for an approach to revitalise the centre, and in each case, the landowners have consistently opposed the opportunities for redevelopment.
Councillor Rowe?
In terms of compulsory land acquisition, I know, Mr Dixon, you said that it was a last resort. If something like that was to occur, would the state government inherit all of the costs and the legal risks? And if so, would that make them less likely to support an improvement plan?
Mr Dixon?
Thank you for that question. So I'll be clear, an improvement plan, the intent is that the state would work collaboratively with the landowners, with the city and the state government together to revitalise the centre. As I mentioned in the introduction, the state government would act as the decision maker for the redevelopment, which would include making improvements predominantly to the public realm and supporting development of the land in accordance with that plan. After all of those avenues have been explored, then the state government could potentially consider compulsory acquisition of the land. If this were to occur, and in answer to your question, then the state would bear all costs and risks associated with the acquisition and not the city. Would it make them less likely to endorse an improvement plan? I don't think so. There is one instance that in doing research for this report, I think in Gosnells Town Centre, there's an improvement plan for part of that town centre, which is similar to what we're trying to do with Kandula, and that hasn't stopped them from pursuing the opportunity to introduce an improvement plan in that location.
Councillor Rowe?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just conscious of the sort of the long journey that's already been going on so far in terms of, I think the timeline indicates that it's been between 21 and 22 years, and the reputational risk that's associated with that, particularly for the residents who have a strong appetite for change. I do appreciate that not all of it's within the city's power, but say for instance, if we do recommend the CEO to advocate for an improvement plan with WAPC and it takes between 12 to 18 months. Over that time, is it possible for the city to still pursue options of developing the land that we currently own to the north of the plaza?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Certainly, in relation to Lot 20, I think administration's intent is in parallel with the process of seeking an improvement plan. We would also consider with council what options are available for its land in terms of redevelopment opportunities, either with or without an improvement plan being in place. And as I mentioned, attachment 3 indicates the local development plan for the site. That's been specifically prepared with the intent to provide a road through the site that would facilitate and enable council to consider options for its land, irrespective of Lot 252 landowners' intent.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Civic?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mark, I'm also referring to Lot 252, as many of us would know that the Strata Title Act has changed. And one of the major reasons that the Act has changed is because a lot of the buildings that where the strata titles are involved are getting very, very old. Can you highlight how bad a condition these units are, and will they need any major surgery if they are maintained as a strata title complex? Is there a report which says that they're in a very bad condition?
Thank you. Mr Dixon?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, yes, the buildings are in a poor state of repair. The city, as far as I'm aware, hasn't undertaken a dilapidation report on the quality of those buildings, but on page 15 of your agenda, there are some images of some of the buildings within Lot 252, which I think clearly indicate the condition of some of those buildings. They are in need of significant improvement, either demolition or potential improvement to the buildings. That's what would be explored as part of an improvement plan.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, it has been a very long road, Mr Dixon, since 2001. If I go back to the report and under the consultation, it doesn't state that you've had any consultation with any of those landowners to say that this item was coming to council tonight, including the church, the tavern and the petrol station.
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, there hasn't been with regard to this particular report, but there has been extensive consultation with the landowners as part of numerous occasions, I think, that are listed in the report. As I mentioned, 2016, 2018, 2020 as part of the preparation of the scheme amendment, as also part of the preparation of the local development plan and visioning work that the city's undertaken. The landowners have consistently resisted attempts to work with the city to improve. What the consultation section of the report does refer to is the meetings that administration has had with the chairman of the West Australian Planning Commission to outline the city's concerns.
So, and just to clarify, so not even the church has been asked to make a comment?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, as far as I'm aware, we'll confirm with the manager of the team that's prepared the report, but as far as I'm aware, there's been extensive consultation getting to this stage, but not as part of this report.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Treby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I note that the chronology that's listed on page 7 pretty much fairly much parallels the journey that a couple of councillors have been on in this, and can I also say I don't think this report would come as a surprise to the strata owners. I do remember, and I just need the date on this, Mr Dixon, that there was a letter, and I also note that you mentioned you, what's the right way of putting this? Severely underplay the amount of, or the commentary about the strata owners resisting support and assistance. Some could possibly say, having sat in some of those meetings, it has been downright hostile. There was I understand there was a letter from memory attached to one of the reports. It would have been in and around 2018, where all of the strata owners confirmed and signed their position that they would refuse to invest any capital into improving that centre. Do you recollect that letter?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there has been several similar letters to that as part of the engagement, as I mentioned, 2016, 18 and 20. I can find a copy of that letter, but in essence, I think what you summarise there is the views of the landowners, in that they're sceptical around what the city's intent is with its land, Lot 220, and have been resistant to invest money into the improvement of their land on Lot 252.
I think it's my view is, and if I could ask you to consider distributing that to council prior to next week, if you could look at that and find that letter. I think it's important because decisions are made on fact and evidence, and that would provide the additional, I think, some additional worthy evidence about the quality of the relationship and the extensive hesitation, let's say, to any support we would be providing. And just one other question, because I do see you refer to the Gosnell's example. in that circumstance, in your research, were you able to establish whether or not the landowners in that circumstance were hostile?
I can try and confirm that through you, Madam Mayor. I think there were certainly some issues in resistance in investing in the area to improve the area, similar context to the experience that we've been having with Kandula, but I can certainly provide more background information to council members before the meeting next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Rowe?
Thanks, Mayor. Just one more question. Mr Dixon, in terms of the two planning tools, I suppose you could say, that I mentioned in the report, an improvement plan versus an improvement scheme, does the scheme carry additional powers, or is it a higher strategic document? What's the sort of difference between a plan and a scheme?
Thank you. Mr Dixon?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so an improvement scheme would essentially replace the provisions in our scheme with new provisions specific to the Kandula Neighbourhood Centre. It wouldn't necessarily convey additional powers, but it would clarify what provisions would sit over the Kandula Centre itself, and it would obviously remove decision-making from the city in terms of development to the West Australian Planning Commission. Under an improvement plan, it does enable compulsory acquisition to take place, as I mentioned, as a last resort, where there isn't buy-in from the owners in terms of improving the area for the benefit of the local community. All of this and the requirements are set out in Part 8 of the Planning and Development Act 2005. Division 1 relates to improvement plans and Division 2 relates to improvement schemes. It sets out clearly the process and also what can be captured under those provisions.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Nguyen?
Yes, I've got a number of questions, Mr Dixon. Just first up, in relation to the improvement plan. Once an improvement plan has been approved, how would that affect the value of the properties within that area, whether it's positively or negatively or neutral, in your experience?
I must say that my experience in preparing improvement plans is limited, given that the city's never undertaken that before. In terms of the impact on valuation, I couldn't give you a definitive answer on that. I'm not a valuer. I would imagine overall, though, that given that there is investment from state government and the city to improve the area, it could only have a positive influence on the area. But I couldn't give you a definitive answer on value.
Okay. Just in relation to the ownership of the strata properties, do you know whether there's been a change in any of the properties since you last liaised with them?
Mr Dixon, before you respond, Councillor Baker, can I please ask you to put your mask back on? Thank you. Thank you. Mr Dixon?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not aware of any recent changes. However, administration can look through our records in terms of correspondence we've previously received to see if there has been any changes.
Because there could be a potential change in attitude if there's a change in ownership within that time. The building has been left dilapidated for quite some time. Do you know when was the last time we had a building inspection to check the integrity of the building?
So administration, through you, Madam Mayor, administration does not undertake inspections of private properties unless there's specific reason or concern for administration to do so. I'm not aware that we have undertaken any reports in terms of the quality of the buildings, but again, I can check that for you.
I meant, for example, sometimes we could have a health inquiry, and when you do the health inspection, I guess you may notice a few things in there, but I'm not suggesting there's any issue with the building. I'm just saying, was there anything that arose from those inspections, for example, those health inquiries?
Thank you. Mr Dixon?
Again, through you, Madam Mayor, I can certainly check the city's records. Certainly when our environmental health officers do food inspections, they're obviously looking at the premises from a food inspection perspective and not the quality of the building, which would be typically undertaken by a building surveyor.
Thank you.
And just last question, in relation to compulsory acquisition, would the state government be buying the land or the property at market value, or would there be a discount that's applied to it?
Mr Dixon?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think as I've tried to articulate in answering questions, the intent of an improvement plan is to work collaboratively with the landowners, the city and the state government to facilitate an improvement to the area. It would only be as a last resort would compulsory acquisition be considered, having explored every opportunity to improve the area first without doing that. We're a long way from that position. I think the first stage is for the Minister and Governor to agree to an improvement plan being placed, and then we would work through the detail of what that improvement plan would include. And that may be, but in terms of that stage, we're a long way off from that stage, so I couldn't give you a definitive answer.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to understand
Dixon. So, Councillor Nguyen, continue.
I'm just trying to understand the process, because a lot of the tenants there run various businesses, and they're not necessarily the landlord. So if something were to happen, would they get some sort of notice? Because they will be losing their livelihood, their business that they have invested in for many years, and they won't have the opportunity to sell it.
Mr Dixon?
As I mentioned, Madam Mayor, we're a long way from that potential stage in any process. I think there would be extensive liaison and consultation with the owners and operators of those buildings, working collaboratively to try and seek improvements for the benefit of the local community. It wouldn't be just a process of compulsory acquiring the land through an improvement plan. There'd be a number of iterations and stages we'd go through to work together to seek improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Treby?
Thank you. Mr Dixon, have you seen any evidence of extensive investment on any of those buildings over the length of time or period that this project's been underway?
Thank you, Mr Dixon.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no. In the time that I've been employed at the city, despite the efforts and attempts by the city's administration and council, there hasn't been any significant investment, hence the stage that we've reached now.
And just further to that, I can confirm, and I'm sure that Councillor Civic could also confirm, that the very reason that this is on the table, and I think it's a great report and a good approach, has been that lack of investment. So I think we just need to make sure there's no misunderstanding about what investment hasn't occurred, which is why we find ourselves in this circumstance, and it's why every local resident who lives in that area has a particular view of the shopping centre, and unfortunately it's not a pleasant one.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors, on 4.1? There being no further questions. 4.2, Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Tonight I'm introducing item 4.2 on tonight's agenda, which is for consideration of Amendment 188 to DPS2 following public consultation. Amendment 188 proposes to amend DPS2 by creation of an additional use motor vehicle repairs on lot 23 Carraboota Road, Carraboota, and was first presented to Council on the 20th of April 21. Administration recommended that the proposal, when it was first presented, not be adopted for the following reasons. The proposal is inconsistent with the objectives of the rural resource zone and could undermine the intent of the zone, which seeks to prioritise agricultural and horticultural land uses and basic raw material extraction. That the proposal is inconsistent with SPP 2.5, rural planning, as it does not preserve an agricultural site of economic significance from the encroachment of industrial uses, and the proposal will set an undesirable precedent for the use of rural resource zoned land within the locality. Notwithstanding this, a recommendation from Administration, Council resolved to adopt Amendment 188, subject to 4 conditions as set out on page 17 of the report. And those conditions were that the extent of the additional use, A42, shall only apply to a portion of Lot 23, as delineated on the City of Wanneroo District Planning Scheme Map Number 2, Map 11 of 24 Pinjar Locality Northwest. The second condition was development shall be in accordance with the plans approved by the local government and will require the issue of a development approval. Third condition was at least one of the owners of the motor vehicle repair business must also reside on the subject property. And the fourth condition was that the motor vehicle repairs business shall be limited to servicing related to agricultural, horticultural and basic raw material extraction land uses. The application was then advertised for public comment for 67 days from 10th of October to 7th of January 2022. 7 submissions were received, all supporting the proposed amendment, citing the benefit of having a local business to service vehicles. However, this represents, in the administration's view, an incidental benefit as a result of the proximity of the business to the nearby growers. And for the reasons outlined in the report, administration retains its view that the amendment should not be supported. However, should Council resolve to form an alternative view to support the amendment, we recommend that that be on the basis that the amendment as advertised. And I'll be happy to take any questions at this stage.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillors, any questions? Thank you, Councillor Treby.
Mr Bowring, I have a question, and I've got to try and frame it in just the right way. Given that there was a decision by the governing body of the City of Wanneroo to accept and adopt a particular view, what has significantly changed between that point and now? What piece of information or body of information has changed that would mean that the governing body's position on the advertised plan should change?
Thank you for the question. It's a technical question that relates to the process of structure planning, and scheme amendments as well. So in this case, what came before Council in October last year was a request to initiate an amendment. Council at that point can resolve to discontinue and not proceed the amendment any further, and may take the view that it doesn't want to proceed it, and that would be the end of the matter. Alternatively, if Council chooses to initiate the amendment or adopt it, it then can go to public consultation. Through public consultation, the Council can then choose to change its position and not proceed with the amendment based on the feedback provided and in light of the comments and recommendations of administrations, the town planners, myself and Mr Dixon. So in this process, in the scheme amendment process, it's not a decision of Council to initiate, it's in terms of what will be the final outcome. The first resolution of Council is to adopt it and go out to public consultation before making a recommendation to the West Australian Planning Commission. It's the meeting that will be held next week which will decide what that recommendation will be to the WAPC and the Minister for Planning.
Councillor Treby.
Or I just have a feeling there might be an alternate recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Treby, you foreshadowing an alternative? Thank you. Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Miles and then Councillor Civic.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say that I'd already foreshadowed an amendment this afternoon with the Director responsible, mainly because Council had dealt with this last year for it to go out for public consultation. It is very clear that the community is very happy to have this business located within its eyes. I had to smile at the fact that 400 residents within 400 metres received a letter. I reckon that would have been all of about 3. So that part of the consultation, I think, made me smile. I understand administration has to obviously write the reports to support the town planning scheme that they have to manage. So obviously council makes a decision whether to sometimes override those decisions and request that the Planning Commission process the amendment differently. Would that be right, Mr.
Bowring?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, that's essentially the answer that I was providing to Councillor Treby, in that we're there to provide a planning recommendation on the grounds within the scheme and the policy framework as independent professionals providing advice to council.
So with the, and I'm not going to go into it, but I note with interest that we did say, or it was suggested by administration, that it would be a complex amendment last year, and it had to go off to the Environmental Protection Authority for their advice. But they don't seem to have really made much comment on the amendment at all.
Thank you. Yeah, that's usually the case, although that seems to be a bit hit and miss lately with some amendments attracting the attention of the EPA for some reasons that escape our knowledge. But as a typical minor sort of additional use on a property, that's the sort of the recommendation or the acknowledgement that we'd expect from the EPA.
And just to finally request, so obviously with the amendment which I asked for earlier today, that would be on the basis of what was advertised. We won't be changing what was advertised. Would that be correct?
Thank you. That was also acknowledged in the deputation by Ms Andrew. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, just for clarification, Councillor Treby was foreshadowing an alternative. You were looking at foreshadowing an amendment. Do you mean an alternative? Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Within our town planning scheme, we have many additional uses. I guess the format of those uses would be similar to this, only the uses would be different. We have many of those, but if council chose to continue to support this additional use zone and the Henderson family operate the business, when the actual business were to cease or they decided to discontinue operating it, would that be the end of the additional use as per our scheme, or can they sublet the property off and have somebody else in there? I would have thought it would cease because they would need to be living on the property. Is that right?
Mr. Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Apologies. It goes to one of the conditions of the recommendation of the amendment, which would be that at least one of the owners of the motor vehicle repair business must also reside at the subject property. So as long as they're a resident, that would be fine.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a supplementary, if I can, please. Isn't it usually the case that the permitted use is attached to the land rather than the individual that owns the land?
That's correct. In terms of a development approval, yeah, it runs with the land.
Yep.
In this case, the amendment would essentially run with the land, provided that it's a resident of the property.
So rather than the general rule applying, you're attaching a condition to the general maxim that the permitted use runs with the land, so to speak, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just referring to page 20, and it actually says about the second paragraph from the bottom. It recommends, the admin's recommended to this end, if the on-site component of the servicing business was relocated to a suitable alternative location. Can you just advise where the nearest suitable alternative locations would be for them to relocate? Because this would be an awful inconvenience and a lot of cost to a local business that appears to be appreciated already in the area it's in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, about 10 minutes away, 10 to 15, depending on which industrial or business service commercial area you're looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. My question's in relation, in going off Councillor Miles' point that he brought up before. To put it plainly and taking the legal side out of it, what is the city scared of in terms of if it is approved? What are the significant risks that the city is worried about if this goes through.
Thank you, Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. It's not so much that we have significant concerns with the ultimate outcome. What we're dealing with primarily is a point of principle about the integrity of the rural zone and what it's set aside for. The issues around whether or not there's a water licence and things like that, they don't factor into our recommendation. We certainly note them, but they don't have a planning weight. What we're looking at is it appropriate for a business which is able to be located in a business or a commercial or a industrial zone? Should it be located in amongst rural uses? And the scheme for its current construction and the intent of the rural zone would say no to that. So it's about protecting the integrity of that zoning.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Sorry, just supplementary to that as well. Has the city passed anything similar within the past in relation to something similar to this, or any council, but like Joondalup or Swan, that's also, and the complications that have come from those?
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. The council has dealt with many additional uses to the scheme in different places. I think just recently we supported an additional use for a dentist operating on Wanneroo Road, where it was an additional use in the residential zone. We've also supported, the council's also supported the parking of caravans in the rural zone, and we're looking at a broader amendment for that, which is currently with the Commission to allow that generally. Although it's not in the same, in our view, in administration's view, the same as a motor vehicle servicing land use, and has a different range of issues.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Nguyen.
Ms Barron, I understand the intent and purpose in trying to protect the land use, rural and industrial, but considering the environment that we sort of working in now, where a lot of the farmlands are now, we know, is going to lose at least 10% of water reduction, and then in some areas don't have water at all. So in terms of setting an undesirable precedent, well, the landscape is changing. Shouldn't we set this at least as a precedent anyway to assist landowners who don't have access or have limited access to water licence to be able to have alternative land use?
Thank you. I'll direct that through to Mr Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. I think it's a good question. It's certainly something that Council will consider as part of the new scheme and what the appropriate use of land in rural areas should be. And that's something we have discussed informally with Council, the whole water issue, the implications of a lack of availability of water in rural areas, and therefore to use rural land for agricultural or horticultural purposes. That the appropriate vehicle to consider that would be through the new scheme, local planning strategy, and that's what we intend to do with you. This is more about, and as Mr Bowring has articulated, that we're giving you guidance around what your current scheme provisions and policy requirements articulate. It's for Council to determine whether in this instance, because of the particular circumstances, Council wishes to make an alternate recommendation, which I think has been quite clear.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just going back in time, Mike, you gave us an example of some additional uses that were attached to rural blocks. You mentioned the caravan storage use, and if I recall correctly, that land was a rural property, and that the caravan storage additional use was supported by administration, correct?
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. From memory, the caravan, the individual use that's out there at the moment wasn't supported by administration. It was an alternative motion to Council to support that. It was then approved by the Minister for Planning.
And just a supplementary, please, Madam Mayor. There's also another example where a rural block was granted an additional use for storage purposes, storage of building materials, building equipment, ranging from scaffolding to, caravans as well, if I recall, storage itself. Now, I think the way the city dealt with that was to defer the matter and not take any action, so to speak, for a period of 2 years, subject to the outcome of a scheme amendment to the area within proximity of the land. I don't want to mention the land itself because it may identify the owner and it's a confidential matter.
Thank you. Mr Dixon?
Yeah, so you are correct, Councillor Baker. I think you're referring to an instance where there was a current business that was operating within the rural area. That business subsequently got approval for a scheme amendment to allow storage and parking of vehicles, including boats, caravans, trailers. That, I think, in essence, then prompted administration through council to seek an amendment to our scheme because of the particular issues associated with people having nowhere to store caravans, boats, trailers, and they were being placed in residential areas where they're not supposed to be placed. So that was an attempt to look at a broader issue. I think in this instance, there is suitable land appropriate for this type of business, notwithstanding all of the arguments that the applicant's consultant has articulately placed before council. There's a different context around that particular scheme amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Aitken?
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a question here. Should administration's recommendation be accepted and this business has to move from this property, would we then have to apply the city's dust management policy to the now vacant land, which doesn't have a water licence, and then prosecute them under the dust management policy?
Thank you. Mr Bowring?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. The use already has that requirement to manage the dust on the property. It has done for its lifetime. The amendment itself relates to, as the applicant has indicated in their submission, about 3% of the land area. It wouldn't necessarily change that situation, but essentially our dust management requirements apply to all the lands.
I suppose what I'm asking is when if the property is rendered that they can't run their business from it and they have to move from that property, then they still have to manage the dust management, and living on the property and running their business from the property, would you not agree that it's easier to manage the dust in that situation rather than having a sterile vacant block of land?
Thank you. Mr Bowring?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. There's a series, unfortunately, there's a series of presumptions within the question. The ownership of the land is not part of the our recommendation or the assessment of the application. How people may deal with the property before or after the amendment is not part of our assessment either. So whether there is dust issues that arise after, if the business is required to cease operating, I don't think the two things are connected.
Well, wouldn't you agree that maybe common sense should prevail, and having the business there, which the community wants there, is a better idea than making the business have to move elsewhere? I think that would be a better option for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Aitken, the officers have written the report as per policy and process, and we have got a foreshadowed alternative. So I will allow that question, but I think it's already been answered. But Mr.
Thank
Dixon.
you, Madam Mayor. Look, I'll be clear, administration's role in this is to provide a professional recommendation without fear or favour for any individual or particular landowner or otherwise. We've reflected council's scheme provisions as they currently exist. We've reflected policy, state government policy, and our recommendation is based around that. Now, it's for council. If council chooses to provide an alternate recommendation, that's for council to provide. And I understand and I've heard all of the comments that have been made. Our role here is quite clear. Until a final decision is made by the minister, your scheme provisions prevail, and that's the basis of our recommendation to you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a point come up when Mr Dixon was talking, and you talked about the previous caravan one and the broader issues, and obviously there was a need for more storage and a longer term solution. Well, judging from the submissions that were received, there was indication that there was a lack of services for agricultural machinery and equipment within the area. So wouldn't you think that would be a long-term solution for this issue concerns as well? Because then we're applying the same principle as what we had for the caravan park. Now we're doing it for a different type, whether it be machinery instead of caravans. So wouldn't the same principles apply in this instance then?
No, I think thank you, Madam Mayor. I think there is a different context here. So there is suitable land available within zones already that exist, and there's land available at Narrabeen that could be utilised for this particular business. The issue, I think, here is that obviously it's more convenient for the agriculture, horticultural users to utilise this business. That, in administration's view, doesn't override the objectives of the scheme, which is to provide land primarily for agriculture, horticulture and basic raw materials. By adding additional uses, it removes the opportunity for that to occur. Notwithstanding issues around water and the small area of land, it's the principle, as Mr Bowering pointed out. In the case of the other amendment, which Council supported, there isn't really an alternative for the demand for caravan storage, boat storage, than people providing that on their residential properties, which is creating its own amenity issues. And that's why I think Council was quite proactive in looking at alternatives in that instance.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Further questions? Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one last question, not bearing on planning, just wondering, the families that are involved with this land, how many, they're obviously still running, the business is still running, and how many are employed?
Thank you, Mr Bowering.
Sorry, I'm not aware of the employment figures. I'm sure they can answer for themselves.
2 sons.
2 sons, there you go. And sorry, the first part of the question again? Yes, so our policy on enforcing our scheme allows the use to continue while there's an application on foot to try and bring the premises into compliance with the scheme.
Still running in a family business, yep. Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Mayor. During the deputation, it was made reference that there was a complaint brought in 2019. Is administration aware of that complaint? And if so, are we able to get a copy of that complaint before next week when we make a decision? So we've got a complete picture of what the issue was that was brought up in 2019, please.
Mr Bowering. Mr Dixon.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I understand it was an anonymous complaint that was received. But administration can provide information to elected members, the information that is available.
Thank you. So there'll be no further questions. Just to reiterate that there has been an alternative recommendation foreshadowed by 2 councillors. So thank you. Moving to 4.3, questions on 4.3. Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Mayor. Just, I guess, a quick question. Removing a public access way is obviously quite important. I've read the report, and I understand what Council did last year, removing the corner one. My question is, are we, because obviously these owners are going to get a benefit, are we going to request some sort of payment in lieu of that public access way so we can put a straight path on the other side of the road, which is currently not in place?
Thank you.
Mr Bowering.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, sorry. The public access way is termed that because of the time it was created. It was the only methodology for restricting vehicle access or providing a driveway to a certain street. So it's only 10 centimetres wide along the frontage of the property. It provides a technical separation of the lot from Warradale Avenue. so that technically you can't drive across the public access way to access Warradale from the premises. So it has a total area of about 6 square metres. So functionally, doesn't function as an access way for the public. It functions as a limitation on access for the owners to their property from Warradale. It would be amalgamated with, and I think purchased from the state, approved.
Okay, so I've not heard of anything like that before. So, so you're saying it's just a technical way of explain?
It simply was created as a method of preventing vehicle access to Warradale from the property when the land was originally subdivided. It's commonly known as a spite strip. The current Act doesn't require that. It has a specific provision in the Act to prevent access from specific roads, which is a notice placed on the title. But before the current Planning Development Act, under the Planning Development Act 1928, the provision was a workaround essentially to create a little bit of public access way in front of the property.
So just to finalise, if those lots along there ever get subdivided up into smaller lots, we would then request some sort of pathway or public access way. Is that right?
No, the verge isn't affected. Essentially, you would not notice the difference with or without this.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors, on 4.3? Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to Mr Dixon or Mr Bowering, page 49 of the report says that the development application was dealt with under delegated authority. I was just wondering for clarification why that wouldn't have been referred to the JDAP, that one.
Mr Bowering?
Thank you. That application was a change of use, so it didn't fall within the JDAP range of applications.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Sangali.
I'm just looking at an aerial view of this, and I've just noticed there's a swimming pool in the yard of this property, and I know we have a policy that doesn't allow swimming pools in daycares. So I'm just wondering if there was a condition on the approval for this.
Thank you. Mr Bowering?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, there will be no pool when it's redeveloped. It will all be re-landscaped.
Further questions? There are no further questions. That concludes planning and sustainability. Thank you, gentlemen. Moving through to assets, Mr Singh.
Madam Mayor, from SS Directorate, I have got 4 reports on the agenda tonight, and I would like to briefly introduce item 4.5.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Item 4.5 is for the tender recommendation on construction of Splendid Park cycling path upgrade up in Yanchep. Just to point out 3 things. In the detail of the report, the ranking for the sub-criteria of criteria number 1 hasn't been included in the report. That will be included in next week's report. And the second item is that on page 170, there is a dot point talking about the schedule of the project, subject to council decision to award this tender. We expect the work to start in April 2022 with a 24-week period, with the completion anticipated by October 2022. Further to that, on page 172, that shows the total project financials, which indicates that there is a shortfall of 1.23 million overall. The recommendation is to fund this shortfall from Strategic Project Reserve, which will require us to do a review of the draft capital works program for next 3 years, which may require some projects to be deferred into future years. So there are 3 key points I wanted to highlight on this item.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Questions, councillors? Councillor Aitken.
Thank you. I'm glad to see this coming to council. I just want to ask a question. On page 167, it says that down the bottom, you've got item 1, sustainable corporate social responsibility procurement. Underneath that, one of them is buy local. How has this been examined within the tender, and have Advantiering Civil Engineers been, what is the local component of their business and buying local? How have they been able to meet that in a percentage way compared with the other tenderers?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. That's the detail I'll be including in next week's report, showing the ranking under those 4 sub-criteria. But for the information's sake tonight, I can advise that Advantiering has scored the highest under the buy local sub-criteria. Also, the 3 tenderers, none of them have got office in City of Wanneroo, but they all have shown in the tender documents the varying degree of information where they'll be using materials from within City of Wanneroo.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, through the chair to Mr Singh. Regarding the successful tender, of course, the actual legal entity itself is DB Cunningham Proprietary Limited, and Advantiering Civil Engineering is just the trading name. What credit reference checks or bankers' checks, so to speak, were conducted regarding the financial standing of the proposed successful tenderer? I'm not sure whether, for example, this particular company has ever entered into a contract of such high consideration, so to speak. In its history, I'd note that, of course, it was the builder of the skate park, etc., the skate park project, the Splendid Park. But what sort of checks were conducted in that regard, and which particular evaluation criteria were they conducted under? Was it, for example, criteria 1, sustainable procurement, or 3, demonstrate understanding of the methodology and specified timeframe to deliver the works? Thanks.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are a couple of separate questions in that question. The first one regarding the financial assessment. City does undertake an independent financial assessment where we appoint a third-party company. They seek all the financial information from the tenderer, and then they understand. We also provide them the type of contract which we are considering them for. Then they assess based on their financials and provide a score, and then provide a rating of satisfactory or very good, and like that. And then they make a recommendation if there is any mitigation strategy to be adopted by the city in considering and awarding the tender. So all of that work has been done. We have a report received from a third-party company on that one.
Just a supplementary, please, Madam Mayor. Thank you, through the chair. And will there be guarantees and directors' guarantees and indemnities in the contract, please? I think this is important. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, normally all our contracts of this nature will require bank guarantee, which will be in 2 parts. The first part gets released at the practical completion, and second part and after the end of defect liability period. Your other question on the selection criteria or evaluation criteria, we do ask several questions in our tender documentation, and the information provided by all the tenders is considered, and a score is assigned, and which determines the overall weighted score for each criteria, and then ranking is determined from that score.
Thank you, councillors. Any further questions? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mayor. Just reading the, which I won't say what it is, the confidential part of it, I notice that this tender is actually the lowest on that list that we've got. I do sometimes get concerned when there's quite a big difference between them, and I understand you've gone through your process, but are we sure that they've actually calculated correctly and that we're not going to find a lump sum extra towards the end or halfway through?
Thank you. Mr Singh.
Through Madam Mayor, it's a lump sum price tender. As part of the evaluation, we specifically looked at all the detail provided by tenderers for all 3 of tenders, and we looked at if there are any mathematical errors. We didn't find any. And it's a lump sum price tender. So I'm expecting there should be no issues like that.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Nguyen.
Just in relation to the seats, if the tender is awarded to a new company, would they supply different bench seats, and then what happens to the advertising that's on that?
Aren't we on there? Councillor Newham, we're actually on 4.5, the splendid park.
Ah, I will wait my turn.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, councillors, on 4.5? There are none. I will take them from the top. Any questions on 4.4? Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor, and I do agree it's a really comprehensive report. Just one question for Mr Singh, particularly concerning the North Madeley residential precinct, those residents who have been anticipating and advocating very strongly for the realignment project for quite some time now. What level of consultation has the city had with those residents? And I'm conscious of the fact that we don't want to notify them of every update because we have to manage expectations, and a lot of this is conditional upon main roads coming to the table. But what level of consultation has been had along the way just to make sure that they are aware of the updates and are also not becoming quite upset and cynical about the process because it has been quite some time?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh.
Through you, Madam Mayor, at this point in time, we haven't shared this information with any individual community groups or residents. The council's recommendation to council for next week is to release option 5, which we have for community engagement. So as part of that community engagement process, we will contact those residents or other interested stakeholder groups and advise them the option which is being under consideration, and before it is brought back to council for formal endorsement.
Thank you. Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr Singh, that extension from Harton to Wanneroo Road, you have indicated that the funding for that will come from Cell 6 and from Cell 7 in the construction of that. I guess funds have been put aside for that from those two cells from way back. How much will that in fact impact what will be left in those particular cells at some time down the track? Because most of that cell 6 now is almost done, but we haven't got to that point at this stage. So the question I'm asking is that the funds will come from both cells to fund the whole thing. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr Singh.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, the obligation for those cells for this Dundebar Road realignment, reconstruction realignment, is from the prelim designs we've done and the cost estimates available indicates there are sufficient funds in those cells for this work.
And a supplementary question, with regards to main roads, I guess there's no appetite for main roads to look into that intersection at Wanneroo Road yet, but has any pressure, or are we seeking to try and get them to come forward with that? Because as you've indicated in your report, that extension of Hartman to Wanneroo is contemplated in about 2030 onwards. But the amount of traffic that's on that road now is at peak times quite diabolical. So appreciating funding, etc., there's no way that these could be brought forward at any time in the future.
Thank you, Mr Singh.
Through you, Madam Mayor, regarding the advocacy of this project toward the state government or main roads, that has been happening through council resolutions previously. We also meet with main roads offices and seek regular updates. The last update has been included in the report. I think they are now looking at an option which is a grade separated intersection with a roundabout at ground. Whether that's done as a single project or in 2 stages is not known yet. And main road is basically looking at this point in time at that option. Then they will develop the cost estimates and hopefully they'll start showing that in the long-term budgets for that to happen. The recommendation is that both sections of Dundebar Road, east and west and east, is that need to be upgraded by 2030-31 and by 2040-41. It can happen earlier if traffic modeling changes and or main roads, state government do bring their project forward, then we should be able to match their timelines, given that city does have funding in both cell 6 and 7.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? There are none. 4.5 we have done. Questions on 4.6, Councillor Newham.
Thank you, Mayor. Just my question in relation to the advertising that is on the bench seats. If we were to change an existing contractor to some other company.
Mr. Singh?
Madam Mayor, can I clarify the actual question, please?
Sorry, so my question, what happens to the existing advertising that are on the bench? Would they get reprinted or placed on a new bench?
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Through Madam Mayor, should council choose to award tender to a different tenderer, then they will have to source the clients for advertising. So under the contract, it's a contractors will, now the tenderer, it becomes a contractor after tender award. It is a contractor's responsibility to identify and engage with clients for advertising. And then obviously if this current agreement lapses on 31st of March, there'll be no advertising on those benches. The new incoming contractor will have to source that.
How often are the benches replaced due to wear and tear over time, given this is like a 10-year contract? Do we check and inspect them over time, or this is left to the contractor to do that themselves?
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Through Madam Mayor, primarily it is left through the contractor, but we do take audits through our maintenance inspection team. And if we identify any issues with the bench seats, we notify the contractor.
Okay, and if we, sorry, one last question. In relation to, if we were to award to the existing advertising company, will they replace the existing one with new ones, or will they keep the existing ones?
So, Madam Mayor, my understanding is they'll be maintained. The existing ones will be maintained as long as they're safe and functional. They provide a service, so they will be maintained. Under the contract, if the bench seats don't become usable, they are damaged, then contractors will be replacing them.
Sorry, just a few other questions I thought of. Is there an ability for them to assign or the supplier to another company?
Mr. Singh?
Through Madam Mayor, at this point in time, the contract, the recommendation is to award tender to street side advertising. I guess your question kind of relates to contract reassignment or assignment.
It's once it's been awarded to them, would they have the ability to subcontract to some other company?
Through Madam Mayor, doing the actual work can be subcontracted to different subcontractors for different parts of the work, but the contract still remains with street side advertising overall.
So that means it's possible, just based on our assessment of the or the evaluation of the criteria, that it's possible. I'm just asking that, let's say street side advertising is ranked #1, but once it's been awarded the tender, could subcontract the work to another company called Outdoor, some other company that's not part of a related company.
Mr. Singh?
Through Madam Mayor, my response to your earlier question was primarily to clarify that it is the portions of work like securing materials or getting the benches delivered or installed that can be contracted out, but reassigning the whole contract would require city's approval.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Baker?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just one quick question, Mr. Singh. Just regarding the proposed term of the contract, the recommendation proposes an initial term of 10 years with one option, exercisable by the city, of course, in favour of the city, of 5 years. Why didn't the city opt for 3 lots of 5 years, so to speak, just to monitor performance? Not that I expect anything would go wrong, but why not 5 + 5 + 5 rather than 10 + 5, please? Or the other way around, 5 + 10. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Singh?
Can I request Councillor Baker to repeat the question? I couldn't hear with the microphone not being used.
Sorry. Yep. The recommendation recommends that the initial term of the contract will be for 10 years, together with an option for another 5 years, and that option is exercisable by the city only. In other words, not the successful tenderer, obviously. Why did the city not run with 3 terms each of 5 years, 15 years, or 5 + 10 rather than 10 + 5? In other words, if there's a problem in year 6 within the initial 10-year term, there could be some court consequences could drag on. Whereas if it's just a 5-year initial term, if they go belly up or they're not performing, we can get rid of them pronto rather than having to sweat it out another 6 years or 5 years, or in some cases, I think the record here at the moment is 15 years in the Supreme Court. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Through Madam Mayor, what we have what we understand from the industry about these type of contracts are better for longer term, where that provides certainty to the contractor to have long-term clients for advertising. That in turn provides revenue to the city. That's number one. Should there be any issues, any length of the contract, 2 years, 10 years, whenever there is any issues, if they do arise, then there are provisions in the contract for city to manage the contract performance. So we will use those measures if required.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just a quick one, and I guess really for maybe the benefit of new councillors as well, Councillor Singh. This contract is purely for the small bench seat, I think. There are other signage contracts as well, so maybe if you could explain those.
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Yeah, through Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. This contract is only for the bus stop bench seat. We have 2 other contracts in place. One was recently awarded, I think last year, which was for the illuminated street directional signs, which you may have noticed, the one at the corner of Dundebar Road and Wanneroo Road, which is actually a sign for the city provided by the previous contractor, where city was entitled to provide its own messaging and type of facilities. So that is for the illuminated street directional signs. That first time that was started about 11 years ago. Last year when council looked at that was awarded to a different contractor after the expiry of the first contract. The second one is for the supply and maintenance of advertising bus shelters. So they are similar type of contracts, and this is the third one.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? No further questions. Thank you. 4.7. Questions on 4.7? No? That concludes assets. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Moving on to community and place. Mrs. Terrelink and Mr. Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are 4 reports this evening from the Community and Place Directorate, and I was proposing to briefly introduce item 4.8.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Item 4.8 deals with the community engagement outcomes for the Alchemist Aquatic and Recreation Centre. We undertook a period of consultation on some high-level concept designs with the community from the period the 6th of December to the 28th of January 2022. We got a lot of comments back and a lot of likes. I suppose the general consensus from the community was support for the facility. We did see the highest level of engagement that we have received so far by the city in relation to this project, which is very promising. In regard to the comments that were made, as I've indicated, the majority of the comments were certainly very positive and supportive of the project. There were a lot of suggestions made by community members, which have been contained in the report and consolidated in the report. And the intention will be that a lot of those comments made by community members will be picked up through the detailed design, because they're probably more at that detailed design level. And in terms of the land acquisition, this is still being worked on, and we're expecting a report to come to council in the near future detailing the matter relating to the land acquisition. And happy to take any questions. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Terrelink. Questions, councillors? Councillor Aitken.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify that the cost of purchasing the land is in the financial implications, unless we're able to get it seeded as a Crown grant on a peppercorn lease or something. But at the moment, that is still in our financial considerations.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, I can confirm that is included in the financial considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. And as a sort of general comment first, those numbers of supporters and advocates for the project were really impressive. One question to Ms Terrellington, it might be speculative in nature, so I apologise. In terms of the parking concern that was raised quite prominently by some people who engaged with this project, do we know how close the proposed site would be to the Alchemist train station? I'm imagining that perhaps public transport might be a way to offset some of those parking concerns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In terms of the location to the train station, it is in very close proximity to the train station. I would say probably within 100 metres. Less than that, less than 100 metres. So it's very close to the train station.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
And just a supplementary, Madam Mayor, do we know if the proposed Alchemist train station would have parking on site? I know that the PTA during COVID trialled free parking. I know that was scaled back and there's still a fee, I think, of about $2 a day. But do we know if the Alchemist train station itself would have parking on site?
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, I understand there will be. I'm not sure if the Director of Planning and Sustainability would like to respond further on that question.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Dixon.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, there is parking that has been or will be provided by the PTA for the Alchemist train station. I think there's 2 locations that have been identified.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? There be no further questions. That was the only report you wish to speak to, Mrs Terrellink?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So we'll take them from the top. 4.9. No. 4.10. No. 4.11. Councillor Treby.
Just foreshadowing an impartiality interest for next week.
Thank you. 4.12. Oh yeah. Corporate strategy and performance, Mrs Jennings. Thank you, Mrs Terrellink. Thank you, Mrs Jennings.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. There are 7 items in this section of the agenda. There's a mid-year review, some monthly reports, and also items that have been to either a workshop or forum. I'm happy to take questions on any of them, Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs Jennings. Questions on 4.12? No. 4.13? No. 4.14? No. 4.15? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor, my question to the Director relates to mainly the payments themselves. Treasury did ask local governments and all other departments to pay their accounts within 20 days. Are we able to achieve that? Are we achieving that now we've got our new system in place?
Mrs Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. We've been actually having a payment run weekly since the COVID situation in 2020, so we changed our payment methodology. We did get a little bit behind over December, so we've now caught up, so we should be back to paying well in time of the 30 days. I know there's a couple of still outstanding out there, that's why I'm hesitating a bit, but we'll catch up with those few that are still out there. Okay.
Yeah, obviously I was aware of November, December because we flipped over from old system to new system and that was always going to happen. But I was just more keen to understand whether we are trying to achieve that target, if not better it, for our community businesses that we purchase from.
Thank you. Further questions on 4.15? Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've just got a question relating to page 300 and 301. in particular item number 122565 and 122576. They're quite big refunds of rates, being 45,962 and the second one 14,731. I'm assuming they're for businesses. And are they businesses that are no longer trading within the city, or can we have a bit more background on those, please?
Thank you. Mrs Jennings?
Mayor, I'll have to take those on notice. I'm afraid I don't have the details here.
Thank you. Further questions on 415? 416? Councillor Nguyen?
Just in relation to the conference allowance, that's on page 349, is that part of a budget that is set each year?
Mrs Jennings?
Sorry, Mayor, which page was that? Sorry.
Sorry, 349.
349. That is on another item, 349.
Sorry, that's 416?
Are we on 416? Oh, apologies, sorry. I thought we were still on the other one. Yes, Mayor, this is a budget that's set each year, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so it doesn't affect the council's budget whether we choose to increase or decrease the rates each year?
Mrs Jennings?
Through the chair, it will depend on what we set in this particular budget, but it shouldn't be that significant that will make a huge impact on rates. However, it may change each year.
And does it depend on the performance of a councillor?
Through the chair, this policy applies to all the councillors.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Jennings. Further questions on 416? None. 417? That's right, nomination next week. 418? No, that concludes corporate strategy and performance. Thank you, Mrs Jennings. Moving on to Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are 4 reports presented to tonight's briefing. All come from recommendations from the Strategic Audit and Risk Committee, and happy to take questions, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I'll take them from the top councillors. Questions on 419? No. 420? No. 421? No. 422? No. Thank you, Mr CEO. Motions on notice. We've got 4 motions on notice which will be presented next week. Item 6, late reports. We have got no late reports. Item 7, public question time. Mrs Smart, do we have any questions on the register?
No, Madam Mayor, no questions are on the register.
No. Are there any questions from the gallery? No. Thank you. Item 8, confidential item. We have got no confidential items to present this evening. And item 9, date of the next meeting, is the special council meeting, which will be held tomorrow, Wednesday the 9th of March at 6:30 in the council chambers. Thank you very much. And item 10 closed. I declare the briefing session closed at 7:40 p.m. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your attendance, your questions, and thank you to the administration team for responding, and thank you to members of the gallery for attending.